Going to shut this front row of light off. Thank you, Wayne. Um, Thank you, George, for all the wonderful research you did. We'll be presenting at different points in time up here, but we both spent a lot of time putting this together. It's been a pleasure being back with George so close as a teammate. So 60 years ago today, our 66 hockey team was halfway between two landmarks for the Waltham hockey program. The Saturday before, we had played in the state semifinals in the Garden. We were the first team to do that, and we have been a couple other that. We lost to Melrose, Waltham team to play in the New England tournament, and we were playing against St. John's. It actually says the semifinals. It was actually the quarterfinals, and the New Englands were won by Cranston East, which was a powerhouse in those days. They had a well-known player named Joe Kavanaugh, who had a heck of a career at Harvard. So our goals here today are twofold. One is to put the history of hockey in Waltham within a context of the broader global flows of ice hockey. And number two, to pay respects and congratulations to the fine work that Wayne and the Historical Society have been doing for a long time. So the roots of hockey as we know it, ice hockey, any hockey, go back way, 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 way back around the world to stick and ball games that had various goals. One example here in Athens, this is the relief at the base of a funeral statue in Athens, 5th century BCE. Now you can see something like field hockey looks kind of like a bully, which is the field hockey face-off. But we have no idea exactly what's going on because we do not have any written record explaining this. Here's another example. This is 2,500 years before that in ancient Egypt. This is the tomb of Keti at Beni Hassan, dated around 2000 BCE. Now, it's the same kind of bully or face-off. Some people have wondered, well, did the Greeks see this painting in the tomb? Unlikely, but the posture of the people is so similar. This particular image has Egypt claiming to be the, the home of hockey. That's kind of outrageous as a claim because similar games can be found around the world. It's hockey, eh? Yeah. America's North America's games, for the most part, as we play them now, come for the most part from the British Isles. All the games we play, one way or another, to the British Isles, most of them. Here's one called hurling. Anyone, if you've heard of Irish hurling, this is Irish hurling after it had been modified in rules. This is 1881, an illustrated set of rules of Irish hurling. Um, so you can see some similarities. Here's another one, 1835. This is called shinty. This is the Scottish game of shinty. Now you can see just by the illustration, this was before organized rules. It's mayhem out there. And the thing about these games, particularly with the stick and ball, as they became folk games played annually sometimes, is they were an occasion in which vicious behavior, which would get you jailed anywhere else, were allowed. It's kind of like ice hockey today in the NHL. Way out front. Now, to be ice hockey, as my brother said, it has to go on to ice. So you need frozen waterways. And this happened, and there are examples around the world. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder, dated to 1565, called Winter Landscape. Um, it's a Flemish genre painting. So there's something going on here, though. If you look at that arrow, you can see what looks to be like a stick. And down here, you can see a ball. There's not organized play, so they may be just whacking the ball around, but there you go. Here's 1884 US Harper's Young People magazine, and this is labeled Guinea as a game. So you can see the ball, they're hitting the ball around. They seem to have pretty good skates. We'll get to the development of skates in a minute. Something's going on. I found in the Waltham Sentinel of 1858 a report about a 16-year-old kid who was hit near the eye with the wooden ball, so playing shinny. And the Waltham Sentinel of the time called for the abolition of this game or the development of rubber ball, which was starting to develop. India rubber was starting to be used for balls at that time. Just a show of hands. How many of you, as a kid, played shinny on the pond and called it shinny? Okay, so shinny was basically keep away, if you remember, shinny. So an old pastime. What about Waltham? There's an image from one of these wonderful books about Waltham. There's the Charles River from the south side of the Charles River, and there's the watch factory. I don't see anyone with skates on skating. They may be walking on there. However, I want to ask, how many of you ever skated somewhere on the Charles River? Have memories of skating on the Charles River? Okay, yeah. I remember a couple of practices that Frenchy Bryn had us around the corner in the Charles River. So plenty of people played on the Charles River. Bob Kelly, Tom's here, one of the Kelly brothers. His brother Bob recalls playing for hours at Walker's Pond and walking home through the Gore estate in knee-deep snow. Talk about a young hockey player sacrificing that way. We used to bring oranges in the bag for, you might have had some cocoa, but the orange. Billy O'Mara, one of our blessed teammates who died a couple of years ago, once told me that the sign of a real hockey player is someone who can peel an orange in a single ride. There you go. Now, it wasn't just one-way flow from Europe. We know that the indigenous peoples in the United States had different kinds of games. And I want to get this right, the Haudenosaunee peoples in the Iroquois Confederacy developed a game that became lacrosse. There's no question they're the ones. It was a sacred game. The French, who interacted more with those peoples, the British people basically wanted to steal their land. The French interacted with them, and so they took that game and developed it not only on a field, but also on ice. Here's 1880 French lacrosse on ice. So there was a two-way flow. I think it would be a great project for somebody, maybe someone in the Waltham school, is to look into the oral history, if there is any in Waltham. If we have indigenous peoples in Waltham willing to sit down and talk about their oral history about games, the development of games. I've done that up in the New Hampshire, Maine area with Wabanaki people. So it's all an oral history. Now, in order to skate, you need skates. That's a given. Here is an example I got at the Windsor, Nova Scotia Hockey Museum. They claim to be the home of hockey too, by the way. In Canada, that's crazy how many places claim to be the origin of hockey. Um, Here is an example of an early handcrafted skate. It's pretty crude on wood with leather to wrap around your boots. It's not a good thing for nice tight turns. I don't think Bobby Orr would have been able to be Bobby Orr on these things. But at some point, I know from research that rather than crude things like this, hand handmade maybe, but better skates were imported from Britain into Philadelphia. I know that as of 1833. And it also suggests that local artisans in the United States may have been making skates to order. Um, so we wondered, what about Waltham? Here's a factory town where there are artisans, metal workers, blacksmiths, leather workers who were into skate making. Well, the one way to look is the city directory. I don't know if any of you know what a city directory was. They began, I believe, in the 1840s. They were like a white pages and a yellow pages. They had people listed and their home, their address. There were no phones, but also businesses, and businesses would run ads in the directory. So I looked through this directory, they're online, to see if I could find any mention of skate manufacturing. I found ads. I found ads from 6 blacksmiths and 12 bootmakers. Nothing about skates. There's one blacksmith, H. McDonald. There's an example of an ad. Nothing about skates. There's a bootmaker, rubber. Nothing about skates. I wasn't really surprised. Here is Richardson Hardware, 1871. I don't think it was around when we were growing up, but no mention at all of skates. It wasn't surprising to me because I knew that the real takeoff in ready-made hockey equipment and skating equipment occurred after the Civil War. And a lot of that flowed out of baseball after the Civil War that got organized. And manufacturers grew up to meet that demand and to create more demand to sell more stuff. And so one of the one of the places I found this actually at the Smithsonian. This is 1880s from a store in Philadelphia, and you can see the skates look pretty good, not bad. But more important to me is the stick, which is more like a chimney stick. Um, they all look uniform, so probably ready made. But the big company that grew in those days was Spalding, A.G. Spalding, out of Chicago, grew eventually by this period of time, by 1900, it was an international conglomerate. And among their marketing tools were annual guidebooks that were about this big. And those guidebooks, we'll get back to them a number of times in this talk. Those guidebooks included the records, they included rules of various leagues, and they included a lot of Spalding ads. Here is an ad 1912. Now, what's important is to compare these top two pictures. Up here, you have a solid, probably steel, a solid steel frame and blade, all one piece. And that was riveted onto the boot. Down here, you have the revolutionary the tubular frame. You can see it's hollow. And then the blade had to somehow be attached, probably welded, attached to the tubular frame. What did that mean? It meant a much lighter skate, and players jumped over to that very quickly. Now, how about Waltham by this period of time? 1905, the Waltham bulletin, we have Richardson's Hardware. Now they are into, you can see, if you can, they're into sports. No hockey mentioned, but also there's an ad by Wright and Ditson. They'll come back into play. They were the big Boston sporting goods company. My guess is if this had been a fall ad, we would have seen some mention of skates and maybe sticks, hockey sticks, but it was a spring ad. Runner of hockey in Boston was something called polo. You probably haven't even heard of them. Done a lot of research on polo as the forerunner in some parts of the country. In the Midwest, in the Maritimes, and in New England, polo was the forerunner of hockey. We'll see how that happened. Where did polo come from? Initially, it was brought to Newport. I'm talking the pony game. I'll say polo. They say, what? What's a horse doing on the ice? Initially, the horse game of polo was brought to Newport, place where the rich had their summer vacation, by James Gordon Bennett Jr., who had spent time in England. Polo came via India to England. He brought polo to Newport with the rich people. At that same time, this is one of these amazing historical coincidences. There was a revolution in roller skating technology that made roller skating much easier, the technological revolution. And around the United States and Canada, entrepreneurs opened up roller rinks. Now, you may remember the 1980s when another revolution using polyethylene rollers. There were roller rinks everywhere. I remember too many birthday parties at roller rinks. Fun. The problem was how many times could you go around the rink and skate around in a circle, or worse yet, watch people skate around in a circle. So you needed something to keep them at the rink. That became polo or roller polo. It was a wild sport, as you see here. They're using those short sticks. They're on roller skates, whacking a ball. I've done research on this, and I'm telling you, it was a wild, wild sport. And in New England, in the Boston area, the 495 corridor, as we think of it, all those towns, many of those towns had roller rinks, and they had teams in an unofficial league. And they had fan followings that took the trains to away games. And in this game of polo, there was a lot of loose teeth, a lot of missing teeth. There were brawls on the roller rink and among the fans. It was a wild, wild sport. What about Waltham? Well, I'll tell you, we were excited. My heart started to go maybe into AFib when Wayne showed us this painting that they have here. This is because I had seen references to polo in Waltham at the rink, and here is evidence of this roller skating rink. I also found it in City Directory, 1883, on Crescent Street. So it was somewhere on Crescent Street. I don't know where. I'd love to find out where, but polo was hot in Waltham. We also know that the Furbush brothers' grandfather was a big polo star in Waltham. I was hoping John could get here with an artifact. He was looking for it, but he's not here. But there's a project worth somebody's attention, polo in Waltham. We'll talk a little bit about how polo transitioned to hockey in the Boston area. And what about Waltham? Now, while this was going on, polo in America, up in Montreal, an ice game was evolving from 1877 to 1886. Local folks were adapting rules, changing rules from a game much like that polo to hockey as we know it today. First, going from a ball, a rubber ball, or a wooden puck to a rubber puck. There was change number one. And this is down by McGill University. That was rule one. Next, from 8-foot wide goals to 6-foot wide goals, that's what we use now. The net had not been invented. As you can see, there were just two poles. From no player limit, the wild kind of west, like you saw in Shimpy, to a 7-player limit. And that 7th player, anyone know the name of the 7th player back in the day? The Rover. And the Rover was one who went, played defense and offense. Kobe Baker, the greatest Rover in the history of the game. So limiting it to 7 players was a great advance. From a roll-in to a face-off as we know it today. The stick, from the short stick wielded with one hand typically, to a long shaft and a broad-bladed stick that you could use to great advantage with great skill. That short stick, there's not a lot of skill you could show in it, but with a long stick, you could develop some great skill. And then no forward pass. These days we use a line, but in those days it was more like soccer, that wherever the ball was, the player receiving the pass could not be ahead of the ball when the pass was made. It slowed the game up. Ironically, people at the time thought that made the game more scientific than just whacking it around. So in Montreal, things were changing. What about Boston and Waltham? Here's a picture of the Waltham High School ice polo team 1895. So they were playing ice polo. You can see the short stick in their hands. It's a polo stick. Okay, so Waltham, we know, played in some rough league, some loose polo league, ice polo league. The conversion to ice hockey took a while, and a key point was 1894-95. A group of players who were what we now call the Ivy Leaguers, had a tour in Canada. They played in 4 cities, and they were polo players, but under this tour, led by George Wright of Wright and Ditson, I think he recognized the potential market to sell goods in. They played 1 game of polo and 1 game of ice hockey with the new Montreal rules and the new Montreal sticks. And the Americans came back totally sold on ice hockey. And they began to convert other people around here. In the Boston area, there was something called the Cambridge Ice Polo and Hockey Team that started in 1897. They played some games under the new Montreal rules and some games under the old polo rules. What I call Boston Conversion Day was 1898 January on Franklin Field. Harvard played Brown. Harvard was more prone to the old polo. Brown converted into Montreal. They played the Montreal rules, and Brown just killed them. And Harvard realized this is the game of the future. You can, again, note the difference in the sticks. Using 2 hands on a stick with that broad blade meant all the difference. Now, in order to do all this, you need indoor ice, right? Even in Canada. They had to, at some point, find artificial ice, even in Canada. They did have warm stretches. They had indoor facilities that held up for the most part, but eventually you needed artificial ice. There were efforts to have indoor natural ice rinks. I found a patent by the Hervey brothers, 1868. This was their patent, to bring cold air in from below to keep the ice surface cold. But as the hot air lifted, it kept the rest of the facility warm. It was great on paper. It didn't work very well. There was a rink set up in the south end of Boston. It didn't last long for obvious reasons. So the great moment uh, for America, for sure, and around the world, really, was in the 1890s, a revolution in refrigeration technology. Um, I hope that's not. Um, oh, it's my mouse. That's all right. A revolution in refrigeration technology out of France, the Carrier company. And at the time, refrigerating meat from Chicago into the other markets was a huge thing. So refrigeration, there was an emphasis on innovation. Someone around 1895 took those innovations and applied them to big ice surfaces for skating. New rinks with artificial ice were opened in the DC area, three of them in New York City, one in Cleveland, one in Pittsburgh. What happened in Boston? Nothing. And Boston fell behind. And horror of horror, Harvard had to play down in New York whenever they played Yale. That's unthinkable to Harvard types in the Boston. So it took a while, but 1910, by 1910, the Boston Arena was open. And this became the center of hockey in this area. And it was a beautiful facility. It was in three parts. On the left, you see the entry, and that existed. In fact, I'll get to Northeastern in a minute. They brought it back to life. But that was the entry, and inside there was a big foyer, a rotunda, offices, and in the middle was the big ice surface. It was the biggest ice surface in the world for a long time. On the right side was the mechanical building where the Zamboni used to come out. That's where the compressors were set up. Now, unfortunately, the main building burned in 1918. It burned down. However, the entry, the business side, that remained, as did the mechanical building. It took several years, but in 1920, they rebuilt the middle part, and that middle part was pretty much the same. The rink was a little smaller. Over time, it became that egg-shaped rink. But that was the rink that eventually the Boston Bruins came. They put a balcony in for the Bruins in 1924. That's the rink we know. That's the arena we know. And the arena held up very well after the Boston Garden opened in late 1928. In fact, the arena did so well and the garden did so poorly that the arena ended up owning the garden, which is a strange thing people don't understand. However, by the 40s, the arena was getting old and they sold it to the city of Boston, and then things really deteriorated. As those of us who played there know, that in fact, by the time we played in the 60s, that lobby, that beautiful lobby, was stuccoed over with plywood. And the only thing worthwhile in the lobby were the French fries, right? Um, but they were darn good. Um, okay, now let's see if I can change. Wait a minute. No, I think I'm good. My hand felt good. Sorry, folks. There we go. So when Northeastern purchased this in 1980, they fastidiously, because they had old images, they brought the lobby back to its original shape. I don't know if any of you ever got to be in that lobby before they dropped the whole building back in early January. And they're going to rebuild a much bigger place for the students of Northeastern and the teams. But this that they brought it back to is exactly what Hobie Baker walked into when he came into Boston with either Princeton or with the St. Nick's team. I got goosebumps. I'm sorry, I'm sentimental about these things. I got goosebumps whenever I went in. And on the right down here is right in the middle of the right side. You can see a big curve. those were windows. Those were stuccoed in when we played there. I think that's where the French fry stand is. But that was an early proto sky base. You could stand in there in the warmth and look out onto the ice. It was a beautiful design. So hats off to Northeastern, and that I understand that that entry will be part of the new building when it goes out. All right, high school sports, a unique American experience in that we put so much money into high school sports, and the identity of so many people is attached to high school sports, unlike any other country in the world. My Canadian friends often say, "You Yanks, you're wasting so much money on sports." And there are many reasons for that. We've done a little better in the Olympics too. Um, well, this was a unique system in the U.S. Waltham developed sport initially, like in colleges. The teams were organized and run by the players themselves, no adults, but the players themselves. Eventually, the adults took over when it became obvious there was too much at stake for both winning and cheating. The adults took over. The same was true in Waltham. In 1904, in the Watch City Bulletin that I think George, there's no mention of ice hockey. There's football, track, crew, baseball, but no hockey or basketball. But there's interest in intramural activity. 1907, in the Mirror, which was more like a literary magazine in those days, it wasn't a graduation yet. But in the Mirror, a key point in time, Jack Leary, the fabulous Jack Leary, is appointed the captain and manager of the intramural hockey league. That's a very important moment. Meanwhile, in places like Arlington High School, their hockey teams are growing like crazy, in part because they're now able to play in the arena, even though a lot of their games are on ponds like Spy Pond. The 1927 Mirror is a magic moment. For the first time, there's a full-time coach. Who else? Jack Leary. And it talks about a schedule, and they had a rink. This Waltham rink was in what we used to call the Dust Bowl. Remember behind the gym? Was that the Dust Bowl, George? In that flat area. George and I think that's where there was a natural ice rink, but for the most part, I think it was protected from the sun because it's down in that Dust Bowl. It didn't last all season, but it gave some ice time under Jack Leary. So that was an important moment for Waltham High School. But they needed someone to focus on hockey, and that was Walter Brand. And he was our builder. Like other places, you needed a coach who was both a tactician and a builder, such as the Patrick brothers. There's Frank Patrick, Lester Patrick, both have major awards, both key people in the development of the NHL. They developed leagues in Canada, not just in the US. The New York Rangers, very much under the thumb of Lester Patrick. Frank Patrick, the very first Bruins general manager. Here they are with one of their sons, Lynn, a Ranger, and I think that's Muzz in between Lester on the right and Lynn. Another place where the coach is both a tactician and a builder, the Soviet Union. There's Anatoly Tarasov, the great impresario of the Red Army team and the Soviet national team, the strongest team anywhere for decades. And there he is with his goaltender, Vladislav Tretiak. And then in this area, we often think of Eddie Burns in Arlington. Eddie Burns went to Arlington High School. After the war, he came back to Arlington High School and he coached football and ice hockey for decades and produced many more hockey players. So you need a coach both as tactician and as builder. Now, here's Waltham High School hockey, 1937. Now, I don't think of Walter as a tactician at all. Walter was not a tactician. He was not a real X's and O's guy. For us, it was, all right, boys, 5 minutes, lace them up. Okay, coach, we'll be ready. Or for the breakout, it was often when I played, foul, throw it around the board. That was the breakout. However, I came to realize he made some really savvy moves in our 66 run. One of those savvy moves, talking with some teammates, is using Pinky Pierce in a 4-person rotation. Man up, man down, can throw off lines. Pinky Pierce got a lot of ice time in that season, and it set us up very nicely for the tournament. Pinky Pierce, rest his soul, was a great athlete, a great gentleman, and a great hockey player. So Walter saw something that none of us would have thought of. He also had a harebrained idea that he claimed he had used earlier to shadow Richie Hebner in the semifinals of the Garden. That's probably why I ended up in the but because of some great work by Stevie LaCroix and by Pinky Pierce and Edgar, of course, we did beat Hebner's team. They came in clearly the #1 team in the tournament. So Walter was a builder, though. There's no question he was a builder. He had an interesting path into coaching. He was a 9-letter winner at Waltham High School: football, basketball, and baseball. No hockey, because there wasn't a real good team to play on. Where did he go to college? University of Illinois. We don't tend to think of that as a hockey powerhouse, although there was a rink on campus at the time, and he probably played some hockey. He came back to Waltham. We think it was around the 33-34 season that he came back to Waltham and he started coaching the team. Because in the Spalding Guide of that year, the Spalding Guide up top, 1935, which would have covered the 33-34 season, there's an entry. Walter, no doubt, wrote that entry. If you were a smart builder, you would send in something about your team into the Spalding Guide, because not everyone got published. You had to actually take that step. He always did. You notice the last sentence up there, Walter Bunn of Illinois is the coach. They misspelled it, which was a common occurrence. Then 1940, you can see the Waltham mirror on the left. Up top, you have Jack Leary, football coach, athletic director. On the left there is Walter Bryn. By that time, it would appear to us, George and me, he was full-time staff. And he would have coached, he was an assistant coach in football for many teams. And on the right, you have Art Quinlan, who was the head basketball coach, and in our time, he was the athletic director. And then down below, you have it was a long entry in the Spalding Guide about the new Bay State League. And Walter Bryn was the president. I would argue he was no doubt the key founder of the Bay State League that in our time became the powerhouse. And it was a powerhouse then. Waltham, Framingham, Needham, Walpole, Watertown, BC High, Wellesley, Quincy. Their main rival was called the GBI. And that's where we played. However, Frank Kelly played 2 seasons in the Bay State League, I believe. I talked to Frank about that. And then we switched over to the GBI. So Walter missed no chance to build. And he was really savvy writing these entries. He always wrote the entries. And the Bay State League had a trophy, the George V. Brown Trophy. George V. Brown, if you don't know it, he's the founder of the BAA. marathon. But he was the number one sports guy. His son was a guy named Waltham, more you might remember. The Brown family were tops in Boston sports. Both of them were involved somehow or other in sponsoring awards to this Bay State League. Waltham never missed a trick. For a guy for a non-player, he was really savvy about building. Now, a good program builds local stars. An example in the Boston area, George Owen in the middle. George Owen grew up for the most part in Newton, went to Newton High School, was a great player, then went to Harvard, celebrated three sport star, football, hockey, and baseball. One of his claims to fame is he never lost a year in a single sport. I think it was his senior year, was the only Harvard team to play in the Rose Bowl, still to date. And he was a great hockey player. He stayed in the Boston area and he played in the arena in the senior amateur league because he had a good job in investments. And many teams went after him to sign a pro contract. He put them off until 1929, early. That was the first year of the Bruins in the Garden. And they convinced him to sign a contract. For 5 seasons, he was the number 3 defenseman. And they only used 3 in the NHL. Think about that. And he had 2 pretty good partners, Eddie Shore and Lionel Hitchman. But he held his own. So he was a local star and a local hero out of a great program out of Newton. Waltham, here we have Walter Bryn, the picture I showed before, and kneeling in front of him is John Kroll, and then to John Kroll's right is Art Shaughnessy. You may not have heard of Arthur Shaughnessy, but there is his entry into the Mirror at the time, and what does he say? He wants to be a Boston Bruin. So he had that dream. He had the dream to be a Bruin. Unfortunately for everybody, Arthur Shaughnessy served in the Marine Corps in World War II and was killed in action in 1945. When we played, I don't know if it's still true, we'll have to ask John McGuire. The top hockey award was the Arthur Shaughnessy Trophy. In our year, it was shared by Bobby LaCroix and Kevin Fahey, the goalies, which was perfectly appropriate. Now, John Kroll, before the war started, he played 2 seasons, I believe, for the Dartmouth Indians. Eddie Jeremiah's Dartmouth Indians, easily the best team in the country at the time. Not even close. They were so good. They would take the train down to North Station and play several games in the Garden Path. They were that good. On that team, this is the 1940-41 team. On that team, there's John Kroll. There's Dick Rondo out of Providence. Rondo was the greatest scorer of the era. He held scoring records for decades after he left Dartmouth. Injuries kept him from going much further. There's Henry Hughes. Those of us from that era know him as the impresario of those great Melrose teams. He was an Arlington kid. And there's Jack Riley. Some of you may know the name Jack Riley, who, after the war, in which he served nobly as a pilot, he came back and coached at West Point for decades and decades. And he was also the coach of the 1960 Olympic team, which, for me anyway, pulled a greater upset than 1980. Easily a greater upset. I've written about it. I'll send you the article if you want. You can agree with me or not, but Jack Riley, a legend. And that's where John Kroll was. After the war, he came back and finished up at Boston State and got into coaching in Waltham and Watertown. For me, The top family, we've had some great brother acts in Waltham. The Yetton would certainly be one of the brother acts. The McPhees, Neil McPhee and George McPhee, a bunch of great brothers. But for three, I think for me anyway, the Kellys hands down. They are Waltham's answer to the Rileys out of Medford and to the Quinns out of Somerville. Quinns with Willie Quinn, Bobby Quinn, Joe Quinn, and Jimmy Quinn. Four of them. We had the Kelly brothers, and we're blessed to have Tom here with us today. Bob wrote to me a common experience among brother acts. I was fortunate to have older brothers that allowed me to tag along and skate. That was certainly true for me with Peter and football with Terry, older brothers who let us tag along, although Terry often gave us a backhand and told us to go home, but not Peter. He was a great big brother. Now, all three Kelly brothers played on very successful Waltham teams. That's important. Frank, 59, 60, 61. Tom, 62, 63, 64. The 64 team with George McPhee in the net pulled maybe the greatest upset I've ever been part of. We were the only team in the state of Massachusetts to beat Arlington that year. That's an Arlington team that ran the table with one loss. Yeah, it was a 2-0 shutout. What a game that was. Tom was the leader on that team, and Bob on the 65 team, which was also a very good team, until Joe Quinn stole them away to go to Catholic Memorial. Bob's involvement with teams off Waltham was also central to the creation of the Summer League Waltham Hawks. He brought in Haven, Tommy Murphy from Cambridge, and some others, and it grew from there. Frank and Tom both became ECAC collegiate officials. All of them were certified officials. And Frank was selected by the NCAA hockey committee to work the championship, the national championship. And for me, I knew the process. That's all American status for me. And Frank also gave me one of the single fondest memories I've had with my time working in the ECAC. It was a television game in 1977. It was at BU. And my job was in the penalty box. I had different jobs as the ECAC representative. And so BU had their bench was right next to the penalty box. I don't even think they allow that in college, but because that's such a great advantage for the home team. So Frank didn't care. He was unflappable. Called the game the same way, start to finish. It didn't matter. And Frank was, depending on who you talked to, he was either behind the times or way ahead of the times in eliminating hacking, booking, and interference from the game. So Frank makes a call on BU. Now, no matter what, Jack's going to yap. He loves to yap. Jack Parker. You probably all knew Jack. He loved to yap at officials. So he's yapping at Frank, yapping at Frank as Frank comes over to the penalty box. And Frank just looks at Jack and he calmly says, "Well, coach, it's obvious that you don't agree with my call." And with that, Jack Parker started laughing and he shut up. I love that story. And that was Frank. And it was representative of all the Kelly brothers for me. Now, what about girls and women's sports and hockey? Pre-Title IX. Here's a graph. Brenda may have actually seen this in class that I made for my classes. A graph which would hit home on common understandings about the participation levels of girls and women and acceptance by the general public of girls and women in sports. And the old graph was this steady increase and then a spike after Title IX. That was the old graph. And here was an image from 1900 the would-be female player just saying someday, someday. I The research in the 1990s by sports historians showed something extremely different. That the 1920s had an extraordinary takeoff of organized sports and acceptance of sports for girls and women. So here's the new graph. The spike in the 20s, and then something happened. It's pretty clear from the evidence we had it was the depression, and something had to be cut. And so what did the powers that be cut? The opportunities for girls and women. So it went down and then it came back eventually with Title IX. However, here's actually before the 20s, 1917, from the Waltham Guide. There's a group of women out of the St. Nicholas Club in New York. And that New York team actually played an exhibition in the Boston Arena in 1918. And then in the 1920s, my co-author of a hockey history, he found evidence of a would-be league alternating between New York and Boston of women's teams. It didn't last. In part, it didn't last. Why? Because those teams wanted to play the men's rules. No club around special female rules. And that became too difficult for the fans to accept. And so the fans didn't come, and that was it. It was going to be a pay as you go. You had to make it on your own. It didn't last. But in Waltham, here's field hockey in the Mirror. It was mostly intramural, but these are women who want to play. What happened to these teams in Waltham, and whether we know of the church league in the 20s in Waltham, the basketball, were there counterparts for women? We don't know. That would be a great topic for someone in Waltham to pick up. Last for me here is you need local rinks to be a hockey town, no question. And you really need indoor artificial ice rinks to be a hockey town. One example of this is Eveleth, Minnesota. I don't know how many of you have heard of Eveleth, but it's way the hell up in the North Country. And it's also the home of the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame for a reason. In 1922, the local boosters put money together to build an indoor artificial ice rink. They had outdoor ice, but like all areas, it was dependent on the weather. This rink vaulted Eveleth to the forefront, number one in a U.S. amateur hockey league, senior amateur league. They were able to attract top Canadians. But they also put out their own homegrown players, including Frankie Grimzik, goalie for the Bruins, John Mariucci, who played for the Blackhawks in the 30s and then went on to build the Minnesota program. And this is John Mayasich, who was a star in the 50s. John Mayasich went to Minnesota, played for Mariucci, and then he was the Western counterpart to Billy Cleary in the 1960 Olympics. It was Mayasich and Cleary who led those teams. They both came a little late. Jack Rowley smart enough to let them come late. And by all accounts, either of them could have played in the NHL, but they chose not to. Another example, Sweden, which was second rate until they started building artificial ice rinks in the 1960s, including this one. The Kempa Holland rink in Örnsköldsvik, way up there, home of the Moto Club, which turned out a bunch of great players, including Peter Forsberg. I happen to coach a team of prep players that played up there. There I am trying to win an argument with the referee in that same ring. I didn't win. Now, what about Waltham's experience with ring? Okay, George?
Stay right there.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd like to echo Steve's thanks that go out to the Historical Society and Wayne, all the work that Wayne has done. Thank everybody who attended today, as well as those who will look or watching today remotely. Another thanks to the archivist at the Waltham Public Library, Danny Hamlin, did some terrific research to help us out here. So it's a group project. So we're looking at Waltham right now and going back to 1946. Waltham City Council passed a resolution to create the Waltham Recreation Department. So things are going to change just a little bit. When they created the Recreation Department, they gave it its own budget, its own board of directors, and an administrative staff. And probably the most visible part of the staff was the people you would see out working spring, summer, fall, taking care of the parks, having them, look pretty good. One of their duties during the winter was to take care of the flooded tennis courts that we had around the city. So we have a slide up here right now, which is Lake Park, also known as Nipamar Park, and that provided close to home recreation, public skating, a little bit of hockey for many of the kids in Waltham. A lot of parents were feeling that this could be a better option than kids walking down to the local pond or seeking a frozen part of the river. So the tennis courts were a big hit, and they had them all over town. They had them at High Street Tennis Courts, Nipamar, Lowell Field. They had it at the Waverson Playground. So that was kind of a step forward right there. They also had, at the time, they were able to sort of jumpstart an adult hockey league at the High Street Tennis Courts back in the late 1940s. So that was great. And if you walk by the High Street Tennis Courts on a Sunday morning, you might see teams like the Island Aces taking on the Rock Alley AC. You might see the Lakeview Boilermakers taking on the Chemistry Cubs. And, a lot of those guys were World War II veterans, had just returned, had played hockey before they went into service. And so that was a real addition for Waltham to have that. So this slide being at Nipamar Park was supposed to be a little bit different than the rest. It was supposed to maintain an ice surface a little bit longer. I think what they found out in the long run was that if the tennis courts that they were flooding were clay courts, they would keep the ice surface much better for a longer period of time. So at the same time that this was happening, there's a state agency that was helping out recreation efforts in Waltham. The state agency was the Metropolitan District Commission, the MDC. So, I mean, their main function for the MDC was, water quality on river coming through the city, that kind of thing. They had jurisdiction over the adjacent land spaces to that. And MDC also had a recreation division. So they were coming in, they were trying to help cities and towns that were part of the MDC to upgrade what they had for recreational facilities. Their main contribution was, the capital improvements they could make in that city. So what we see here from the MDC, one of their first forays into Waltham was the creation on River Street, and a small parcel of land between River Street and the Charles River of, MDC swimming pool. This is 1952, a few years later. So they came in and they created this swimming pool, which was terrific. People really appreciated that, having that, especially on those hot, sweltering summer days. parents were able to send their children down to swim at a place that was guarded by certified lifeguards, filtered water, was also treated with chemicals, a lot safer than what they may have been doing before that. So, um, pool house existed right there. You had a men's and ladies changing room, your showers, you had all kinds of amenities, and that was just a great addition to Waltham. That's 1952. Fast forward to 1959, there was some discussion inside the executive ranks of the MDC. Someone floated the idea, well, do you think we could ever put a temporary skating rink during the winter over the empty pool? And, now we got year-round use of this, almost year-round. And so they investigated the idea, and it turned out there were possibilities for this. Everybody did their job in terms of architects, the engineers, and so forth. And they're ready to go forward with this. And one of the main people who was pushing the idea as an executive in the MDC was a Waltham guy. He was actually the executive secretary. It was Richard Furbush, affectionately known as Pops to friends and family. Pops Furbush was coming in. He was going to sort of shepherd this idea through and make it all come to fruition. So great idea. They moved forward with it. In July of that year, they ran into a Pennsylvania steelworkers strike, which kind of canceled all of the construction, that was supposed to take place in the rink right there. And they were all hoping that they could keep this thing moving forward. So with the steelworkers strike, it was impacting the entire country. It impacted the military, the automobile industry, the interstate highway construction. So people were interested in getting this strike settled as fast as they possibly could. So President Eisenhower intervened, and he invoked the Taft-Hartley Act, which kind of required those workers, while they were still on strike, go back to work, keep on negotiating, and we'll see what happens. So that worked, and country was back up and running again. A smaller project like the Waltham concept of putting a rink over a pool was able to start moving forward again. Okay. Now here we see in the slide, which is on the left, the steel arrives, and they used heavy equipment and a lot of labor to get the steel trusses inside the empty pool, which would later be covered with plywood, piping over that. They probably had to put 8 to 10 miles worth of piping in there, carried the ammonia through to freeze the ice and create the first artificial ice surface that ever happened in Waltham. And there was a big thing. The Boston Globe and the Waltham News Tribune labeled this as the Waltham experiment. They wanted it to work. It did work, and the MDC was going to go forward with this same exact plan in the other swimming pools they had in the Boston area. As time went on, they thought that a better option might be to investigate the possibility of a new permanent rink. So, for convenience sake, they built that new permanent rink about 150 yards west of the existing one. So you had the River Street rink as a permanent thing, not year round, but during the hockey season. And the pool was just free to be a pool during the summer. So, okay. No, I'm sorry. No, not yet. So on opening night of that rink, the Waltham experiment, they had opening ceremonies that included Mr. Furbush, Richard Furbush. He was accompanied by Mr. Brown, the Bruins president. They brought a few Bruins players with them. A few city councilors accompanied them as well. And that was on February 1st. So it was really great they got that thing up and running during the winter and weren't too delayed. stayed open for the entire month of February, most of March, and people were really happy to see something like that come in. That night, the News Tribune reported that there were 1,000 kids showed up to try and go skating on that rink. And I mean, I don't know if that's an accurate count or not, but I think what they had to do was they let us go on the ice in shifts. So it would be like, okay, first 30 or 40, you're out there, you have your 10 minutes. Most of the people who went on that ice that night, if they only had skated on some tennis courts where the ice got kind of beat up, and their skates weren't sharp, they went down pretty fast. You needed to have this artificial ice. You needed to have your skates done well, and so that was it was a great opening. They were able to maintain use of the pool house. So you've got the skating rink when it was over the pool, and then subsequently moved next door. They were able to use the pool house for both iterations of that rink. Put down the rubber mats inside. They had floodlights. They had warming rooms if you needed that, and it just turned out to be a great thing. So now the River Street rink, the second one they put in, that was great for approximately 10 years. The second rink started to have major malfunctions. Now, when they did, they realized we could continue fixing this, drill up the cement and so forth, but probably a better idea would be look for a different location. Let's put up a permanent 12-year facility with a roof, with walls, the whole bit. And so they got together on that idea. And it's going to require collaboration between Waltham Recreation Department, the mayor, the city councilors, some people from some representatives from the Belmont area. And they did a quick search. And to their credit, they moved this new idea of sort of phasing out the old River Street rink that was failing and finding a location and getting all the, permitting done, get the whole thing up and running. Very short time. This didn't take years or months. It was weeks, they pushed that through the state legislature, and they selected. They had four basic locations that they were looking at. They selected Cotton Pond Road. And they have a rink up there, which is still functioning very, very well today. Other considerations were the empty lot that was across the street from Our Lady's Church, or on the property of the Kennedy Junior High, or possibly over on the island in Forest Grove. When they finally arrived with this, everybody was happy with it. I think they're still pretty happy with it today. So that was great. So we have an architect's rendition. Yep, I'll stay there, stay there. Okay. So before the rink was actually up and running on Totten Pond Road, Recreation Department stepped in, started creating programs for children. And one of the ones they did at first was 5th and 6th grade hockey every Saturday morning. And they selected Waltham history teacher Lauren MacArthur to lead the program. We can remember now that Lauren would be out there. He was the only on-ice presence, and he kind of refereed. But more importantly, if you blew the whistle, it wasn't going to be for an offside or an icing or penalty. It was going to be a teaching point. So Lauren was able to get these young kids, 5th and 6th grade, bring them along, and in his own style, just show them this is the game of hockey. This is what you want to do. Here's how you go into the offensive zone. Here's how we take face-offs in certain parts of the ice. So that was great. Lauren very wisely selected coaches for his 6 teams from current players who were on the Waltham Junior High hockey team. So you got the 9th graders behind the bench. They were the bench coaches, and excellent choice by Lauren. The photo that we have here, we have a 5th and 6th grade team. The coach who's on the far left is Kevin Fahey, that Steve had mentioned before. Coach on the far right, who happens to look a lot like Steve, is his twin brother Earl. So that the programs were up and running, and the recreation department wanted to keep those programs running without any interference. They later on added a junior high program, an adult program. The adult hockey league at night moved off the tennis courts and onto the artificial ice. Okay, no, we have the architectural rendition of the rink that was eventually done on Totten Pond Road. Wonderful. Okay, and again, expedient, and they got the whole thing planned, got the site work done, got the building up, and people were skating on that by November of 1972. At the same time that this rink was being built, um, you had a private contractor who was building a rink adjacent to Leary Field on Athletic Field Road, and that thing was a state-of-the-art rink. You go in there, and I mean, everything about it was just first class. They had beautiful locker rooms. They had a pro shop. You know, they had a full NHL-sized rink and a rink right beside it under the same roof, which they call a patch. So it was same length as the regular ice, probably 25, 30 feet wide. Great for figure skaters. I don't know if there was any hockey going on there at the time, but um, the rink was facing that private rink was facing a couple of real obstacles, you know, that a state rink would not face. And we'll talk about that in a few slides later, where the only photo evidence we could get was one of the inside of the rink, which is um, where the Waltham Angels girl hockey team decided to make their home. Okay. Okay, so we're moving forward here from facilities to personnel. Seeing the 1940 Waltham High hockey team right there. They won the league that year. They were still in the Bay State League. And their big star is on the front row right there, third from the left. He's right next to the goal. His name was Hector Rousseau. Hector was a second generation migrant from a Canadian family that made their home in Waltham. And he just had an all-world career at Waltham High. When he graduated, right after the war ended, he was able to play for a team called the Boston Olympics. They played out of the Boston Garden. He had 1 or 2 years with them, really did well. And he ended up being on the 1947 national team for the USA. It wasn't Olympics yet. The Olympics had not kicked, Winter Olympics had not kicked in yet. But yeah, he made that team, and he did very well. He played 7 games for the USA hockey team, 5 goals. So the kid could really play. Hector was representative in Waltham of what you saw going on all over New England. Teams would leave Canada, they would migrate down to a place where they could really feel at home. And Steve highlighted 3 New England cities that represent that. You have Lewiston, Maine, Berlin, New Hampshire, Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Okay, all made their mark in, especially in high school ice hockey. So those places, they all had a few things in common. Parents came down, they found good jobs, they put roots down. French-speaking community in those places decided it would be a good idea to establish a social club, very much like what we have with the French American Victory Club here on Elm Street. That was very important to keeping people together. They also came down with Catholic priests who would establish a new Catholic school, first a church, then a school in that time. And they all just did very, very well for decades. Berlin, New Hampshire, 16 state championships. You look at down at Woonsocket, Rhode Island, um, 26th state championship for Mount St. Charles down there. So these hockey teams, led by the Canadian priest, opened their schools. What they did was they really set the bar high and they established, this is going to be the standard for whoever comes after us. There might be a few more French Canadian players, or just if it's local kids going there, you know how good you have to be to follow us in this program. Next. Hey, Steve came across the yearbook photo of the 1962-63 Waltham High hockey team. Great group in there. And what caught my eye is when you open that yearbook and you look at the full page 178 and 179, their colleagues or their classmates who were student editors of the yearbook made a comment under that picture in the yearbook, which said, with its Canadian accent, the team was very exciting to follow. So they loved that. Let's look at some of those Canadian players who were so exciting to follow. What we have is on the top row, we have John Ledger. John Ledger was, I believe, a defenseman. And forward, yeah. He came out of his senior year with incredible numbers. They only played 14 games in league competition. That's all there was then in the tournament. He came out with 12 goals and 15 assists in 14 games, and that's really incredible. So John moves on to Northeastern University, where he played 3 years of varsity hockey, and my understanding is that he led them as captain his senior year. So, who's that handsome guy right next to John Ledger? Do we know him?
No,
Looking at the middle.
Tom Keller,
Looking at the
Peter Hardy.
middle row right now in the photo. Middle row, we have Paul Melanson, sometimes listed as John Paul Melanson. He was a tremendous defenseman at Waltham High. I'm told that he arrived here after he was a Canadian kid, had a short stay at Lynn English High School. Then he was here, and a textbook defenseman. And to watch him play was, I mean, you could just, make a learning tape of how he played. Right beside, not beside him, but in the same row right there, we have Roger Richard. Roger Richard, and all three of those guys were seniors. They could really, really bring that exciting Canadian thing, Roger Richard graduated from Waltham High School. He matriculated at Salem State College, where he played for the Vikings for 2 years, their men's hockey team. And he graduated with a degree in education. And he took his degree in education and he got a teaching job in Billerica High School, became their boys ice hockey coach, which was great. He had some pretty good success up there. Won the state championship 3 years in a row, 1976, 77, 78, with a 3-year record of 71 wins and 3 losses. So, he did it all. And helping him win those championships, he had the most valuable player in the entire league playing defense for him. And his name was Tom Glavin. Tom Glavin credited Roger with instilling in him an understanding of what it is to have self-discipline. And that's pretty good. Tom Glavin also played a little baseball. You might have heard of him, So, for Roger, after his coaching career ended probably sometime in the mid-'80s, he became active in the State Coaches Association. And he had already been inducted to the State Coaches Hockey State Hockey Coaches Association. Great job. He became active in that and became their president. And as president of the MSHCA, he was able to induct his high school coach, Waltham. So that was good. Bottom row is the youngest of the so-called French Connection, Al Cormier. Al, I believe, played 2 years for Waltham High School. He's a great forward. And 2 years ago, I had the pleasure of sitting down at a Waltham High hockey game with Al and get some stories. And yeah, you get some stories. And so Al told me that he came down here and he was skating on the River Street rink one night. And the adult who was a skate guard there noticed his skating skills right away. He was just flying around the rink. So skate guard and Al struck up a conversation. We found out that although Al was 16 years old, the new arrival, he didn't have time yet to register at Waltham High School. And so the skate guard also happened to be a Waltham High teacher. His name was Sonny Ray Yetton. And he said, you meet me tomorrow morning outside the high school. I'm going to walk you into the main office. We'll do everything we have to do right there. Take you up to the guidance office. And in the guidance office, they will figure out exactly what a good program is for you. So Mr. Yetton just walked him through the whole process. And he left him with the advice that, you know, it's not always going to be easy. So you're going to run into a few roadblocks. And if you do, I want you to come down and see me. If I have a class going on, don't walk right in. But stay outside my classroom door for a while. When the bell rings for passing, you come and tell me what kind of a problem you're dealing with, and we'll straighten the whole thing out. So, Al, you know, tremendous addition to the so-called French Connection right there. And Al wasn't going to stop there. So he graduated from high school, played adult hockey. He ended up playing for a team called the Framingham Picks. I think it was in the Eastern Hockey League. He played at a high level for a long time. Stayed in town, settled in Waltham, and got married to his wife, Bernadette. He and Bernadette were able to gift Waltham High School with 2 great hockey players, 2 sons, Derek and Jason, who continued their dad's illustrious career right there. So Derek and Jason Cormier are both in the Waltham Athletic Hall of Fame right now for hockey. So that's a pretty good gift. And they also have a few grandsons playing college hockey right now. So that's kind of a legacy. And it was all set in motion with a conversation between Mr. Yetton and Al, 1962, at the River Street rink. One second. So, as Al was leaving his high school hockey career at Waltham, he passed the torch to 2 more Canadian kids who had come down, Emile Beliveau and Edgar Bastarache. Could have discussions all day long about Edgar. He was a pretty incredible player. His coach, Mr. Blinn, described him as the best player he has seen around during that era. And he had the skills basically to do everything. So Edgar was here, played junior high hockey in 1963, immediately jumped onto the first line at Waltham High with Emile Beliveau on the wing. Okay. He was on the other wing with Bo McCausland at center. And they took Waltham to the state tournament that year, ran into a tough Malden team. But Edgar was able to sort of jumpstart this tournament thing in the tournament the next year. Okay. And after doing very well in the state tournament, he helped his team get into the all New England state tournament for hockey teams, all New England states at the Boston Garden. So Edgar had it all. So Edgar finished his high school career with 61 goals and 51 assists, 112 points. Again, pretty incredible for the short schedule that we had. Okay, in the 10-minute periods that we played at the old Boston Arena, you know. So Edgar was going to draw a lot of attention from the higher ups in hockey. So I've heard a lot of, not a lot, I've heard a few college coaches say, you can look at players who come along who have great statistics, who have tremendous write-ups in their hometown paper, the Boston area papers. But these scouts have said that when you look at hockey players, it's an eyes-on business. You have to see what they're doing all the time. You have to see what they look like if someone throws a cheap shot at them. How do they respond to that? If they're going back to their bench, changing up after a shift that didn't go that well, what's their attitude right there? So character is an issue. The scouts were looking at everything. Well, the scouts who came out for Edgar were not only the college scouts in the Boston area who were very interested in him, but actually Boston Bruin front office came out there. There was Hap Ems from the front office, Buddy Kane, their chief scout, and they liked what they saw. So we're going to follow Edgar's progress as he had his college career. He went to Northeastern for 1 year, decided he wanted a change or possibly a gap year. He served in the service. He was coming back to like a different scene from what he had left behind. So Edgar decided, you know what, I'm going to get a job, going to work hard. He had several great years with as a letter carrier for the U.S. Post Office. Person that they delivered to on his route, they loved him. They knew his stories. So Edgar did a great job. Unfortunately, Edgar passed away far too young, and the stories about Edgar will never stop, even though Edgar's gone. Okay, moving on here to a team of women who became interested. They had a core group in East Boston who had played together. I mean, they were very, very advanced for that time. They added some players to their team from other North Shore towns. They knew about these selected players who would make them great. And they ended up getting a sponsorship from Massport. So the Massport Jets became just an incredible women's team. They came together. They had a great coach. His name was Tony Marbo. And as they looked around, they realized one thing. There were no other teams to play of their caliber or even women's teams that were trying very hard. So what do? Well, you play boys high school, practice, maybe JV teams. You play men's adult league teams like that until you can get your game up together. So the Massport Jets came into existence in 1971. 1973, Cornell University was hosting a college tournament. And somehow they understood that this Massport Jets team, which was not a college, should be in their tournament. So in 73, the Jets were invited to the Cornell tournament. They also included Yale University, Brown University, and Colby College. And Massport Jets come out on top of everyone. So the acclaim went forward that, well, this is the team that should be recognized as the best U.S. women's team. They were, while all this was going on, they were sparking such interest in other cities and towns that town teams were having their own girls teams that would travel around and play. Tremendous stuff. They just grew it like that. So, 1976, there's some information that they hosted a very high level tournament at the Boston Arena and had the teams that had been inspired by their success come into the arena and play them. I think the tournament was actually won by the Assabet Valley team, which has been a powerhouse ever since. And so the Massport Jets continued on. They at some point were out here playing a Waltham team called the Angels, the Waltham Angels. Um, so hockey was really starting to take off there in the late 70s. 4 women who were committed and playing sort of at an advanced level.
UNH was a good example of the effect of Title IX. 1977, some women on campus on their own, without anybody's help, went up to the president's office and said, there's something called Title IX, and we want a piece of the hockey action. And they got a team, they got a coach by 77. And what I find interesting, this is Kathy Bryant, one of the all-time leading scorers in UNH hockey history. She was a member of the gas line, goal a shift. Now, at the time, UNH was one of the few teams that provided scholarship help. But what I find interesting here is kind of an in-your-face shoulder. You see that arrow right on the shoulder, the insignia of a female. Kind of, don't tread on me.
It's the Waltham Angels team that we just talked about. And a few slides previous to this, we mentioned the private rink, the Waltham Sports Arena, adjacent to Leary Field. State-of-the-art locker rooms, pro shop. I mean, it was ideal. It probably had seating capacity for maybe several hundred, maybe 800 or 900. It was great. Waltham High played their games there. A semi-pro team called the Waltham Habs with Al Cormier played there, and it was just one of the best things that ever happened. I also mentioned before they were faced with a couple of roadblocks. State rink, MDC rinks were going up rapidly all over the place, and they could sell rental ice at a much lower rate with the full financial backing of the state. So if you're a private rink, you don't have that. And then another absolutely sort of devastating blow was you had the late 1970s OPEC energy crisis that had us all waiting in gas lines and everything. Price of electricity went through the roof, and they didn't know what to do. They were on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. They called in the Waltham YMCA executives to see if organizationally they could do something with the rink, keep it afloat, keep it going until things got straightened out. YMCA did their best, but it just was not meant to be. So you can see the YMCA flag inside that Waltham Sports Arena, and it was a rink that was really going to be missed. So the building still stands today. After it went out of business as a hockey rink, it became a hardware store, Grossman's Outlet. Then it became Harvey's Industries, and but the rink is still there. Unfortunately, not functioning as a rink. Okay, but looking at the photo, that is the Waltham Angels, and like the Massport Jets, they had something in common. They both came into existence without waiting for Title IX. They knew they loved hockey. They were going to do anything they could to privately fund or fund themselves and keep that thing going. And they really did a great job of that. I mean, the Waltham Wings lasted as long as the Jets did, which was until the early 80s. And actually a little longer for Waltham. They changed their name from the Waltham Wings from the Waltham Angels to the Waltham Wings. And they kept on becoming more and more successful. So they would go to senior A competition for women, wherever it may be held in the country, and come out with a real good second, third place. Finally, in 1985, they won the whole thing. The tournament was held at Concord, probably at Assabet Valley, and they came away as the national champs of senior A women's hockey in the country. They were coached by some really good people. They had Waltham Police Sergeant Ed Gaudet, totally committed into that. They had Mr. Gaudet is the back row there, second from the left. Immediately standing beside him was Mr. Cam Ledger. They also had Margaret Lamartina on the far right. Margaret was a former athlete in her day. She had two very athletic sons. And she was very interested in keeping this girl things moving in the correct direction. You also had John Palmer, who had very instrumental in starting Waltham youth hockey. He had a daughter playing on the team. He wanted to also move the ball forward. So those people right there, they just kept on going. And I think probably by the mid to late 80s, some of the kids who were adults by now, aged out, they left us a great legacy right there. So when they were still the Angels, what happened was, if there weren't enough really competitive teams right around here, they would go on Canadian trips. So even when the Angels were still pretty much teenagers, they went up, and they were invited to a tournament at Loyola University, Canada. They went up there, and they actually came away with 2 wins. They beat Loyola, they beat Abbott Junior College, and they lost a close one to McGill University. But it was clear to everyone, like they were really here to stay and be taken seriously. I think the 1985 thing was the culmination of their dreams. They were senior champs. They beat the team from Dearborn, Michigan. And I'm thinking a lot of those former players, when they were no longer playing, went on to start youth programs for girls in their own community. Good, Steve?
The last.
Yep. Okay, the inaugural team at Waltham High School. Great photo of them right there. They came into existence officially on the MIAA competition in the year 2002, 2003. That's the yearbook photo. Well, now, if you follow the developments from the high level, very intense, but also very limited numbers who were competing in the 70s, there was a steady growth of private club teams that were making their mark all through the 1980s. Local youth hockey associations were seeing 1, 2, 3 girls appear on teams at the lower level and hopefully progress all the way up. And when they reached a critical mass, you had enough kids that you could really say, we can have a team. It's not going to be just a fun thing for 1 year. They're going to stay together. They're committed to doing this, and the high school is committed to sponsoring them. I am a qualified coach, a young woman who had just finished her career playing at Boston College for the women. So that was great. So as we get to the 1990s, there were approximately 12 high schools that weren't under MIAA rule yet, so they had to be called a club. They were very committed, and their athletics directors made sure that if we're going to say this is a club team from some high school, you have to be under the same jurisdiction as all other athletes here. Academic requirements and every other thing that an MIAA athlete would do in basketball, baseball, softball, whatever. You will be held to those standards. So they did. There was 12 of those teams. And then one night, back in 1996, there was a meeting. It was hosted by Lincoln Sudbury Athletic Director, Nancy O'Neill. And she heavily relied on the Belmont coach. His name was Mark Haley. And Mark Haley was able to work with Nancy O'Neill, okay, set up a tournament at the end of the year to which all 12 teams were invited, Division I and a Division II. So the Division I girls had pretty good hockey experience. They were put in their own tournament. Division II teams who were like brand new that year, but pretty good, and they were put in Division II. And when they had this tournament, I mean, things went very well. It was all held at Belmont High School, the Skip Vigliarolo rink. And I think Belmont footed the bill for this. They paid for the refs. They donated ice time that was kind of left over at the end of the season by teams who were no longer playing in the tournament. So it just worked out really wonderful. And I would have to say, Mark Haley, for doing that year, staying on it the next year, the next 4 years, he really drew the attention of the MIAA. And they said, okay, this is a serious thing. We're ready to sponsor them, and we're ready to go and actually start to create leagues here. As leagues were created, you would have, say, for example, in the Bay State League, they would have the same schedule as their colleagues, the boys. So if the boys were playing at home in their home rink one night, the girls were away, and they'd flip. So after doing that for a while, if there was a team or two in the league that was either lagging behind or just a little bit slow to initiate something that there was a demand for, their colleague ADs that were in that league would make calls, or they'd be at meetings and saying, when is such and such a high school going to finally have a team? We want to complete the league here, so it's identical to what we have for the boys. The Waltham High School girls, the Lady Hawks, they took to the ice in 2002, represented a high school in the town very well. And I think there was a lot of cooperation with the boys program there that gave them any assistance they might need. They had pretty good ice time. And so they established a very respected program at Waltham High, which we're thankful for, still exists today. Some years they went really deep into the tournament. And it's like every other league goes in cycles. They have some down years, they have some up years, but they certainly got it done. At this point, there are 104 high schools that grew from that original 12. 104 that offer girls hockey. Some of them are co-op teams, so there were only 92. 92 teams representing 104 high schools, and 65 of them made the postseason tournament this year. So great success for girls hockey in Eastern Massachusetts.
Okay, the last couple of slides deal with what my co-author in the hockey history called the rise of corporate hockey. So George talked about private clubs driving the growth of girls hockey. And increasingly, we see that on the boys' side too, where people are having a career, they're making a life with these clubs. And the parents have to pay more and more money. That's one of the hallmarks of the rise of corporate hockey. Private for-profit teams and leagues. Another is the rise of the summer camp for money. And that started in the 1950s. By the 60s, it's well underway across the country. Hockey magazines are talking about summer clinics. And who's in the middle of it? Walter Bryn, exactly. And Walter ran his summer camp at the Lynn Arena, which was one of the few rinks until the growth of the NBC rink, with Doug Mones and Don McKenney, and Peter was a proud student of that clinic. It was pretty good. It was a pretty good clinic. And once again, Walter Bryn was ahead of the game. The other area where Walter was ahead of the game was in branding. Walter understood branding, whether it was the development of the league, where he did incredible PR. He went out of his way to build the brand of the Bay State League, or the junior suburban league where we played junior high hockey, but also with sticks. Walter was ahead of the game. So Walter had his own stick, the Bryn Pro. The Bryn Pro. There's the Bryn Pro. You can see it right. There, you can barely make out the Bryn Pro. We got our stick for free, but if it broke, you had to bring Waltham shaft that showed it was a Bryn Pro. He wasn't going to accept some crappy CCM or Hesperus and give you a Bryn Pro in replacement. So Walter, in all these ways, he was really ahead of his time. Pardon?
So that's strictly pretty